The bread was almost ready. I could tell by the smell that particular moment when the tapioca flour and the cheese and the eggs stop being separate things and become something else entirely, something that belongs to no country and every country at once. The smell of my mother's kitchen in Sao Paulo and my own kitchen in Hialeah existing in the same breath at the same time. I had made this bread every Sunday for 35 years. I did not need a timer. My nose knew. I was wiping down the counter when I heard the truck. Not an unusual sound in a neighborhood like mine, where people are always arriving or leaving, where moving trucks and delivery trucks and food trucks park along the street on any given day and no one looks up from their coffee. I heard the engine first diesel, heavy, and then the particular sound of a large vehicle reversing, that steady mechanical beeping that means something big is going somewhere. It has to go carefully. I dried my hands on my apron. The apron is blue, the color of faded denim, with a pocket on the left side where I keep a folded paper towel. I have had it for 11 years. It was a gift from my cleaning crew when I turned 52, the year I paid off my mortgage. I opened the front door because I am a woman who opens her door when something happens in her driveway. That is not curiosity. That is the habit of a person who owns something and pays attention to it. The truck was white, large, a moving company's name printed on the side in green letters. It had pulled partially into my driveway and was idling there, the engine running, the smell of exhaust mixing with the morning heat that in Miami arrives before 8 and does not leave until after dark. 2 people were standing at the edge of my property, a man and a woman, both young, both holding papers, both looking at my house with an expression I could not immediately name, not hostile, not confused exactly. Something between the two. The expression of people who have arrived somewhere they expected to be empty. The man saw me in the doorway, and he walked toward me. He had a folder under his arm. He was wearing a blue polo shirt with a company logo on the chest. He said good morning. He said his name. I did not retain his name because what he said next took up all the space where his name would have gone. He said they had been told the property would be vacant by that morning. He said they had a signed purchase agreement. He said the escrow company had provided them with keys. Then he held up a key brass, no cap on it, brand new, the kind of key that has never been in anyone's pocket long enough to pick up a life, and he looked at me with that expression again, and I understood what it was. He was hoping I was someone who had come to let them in, a property manager, a neighbor, anyone other than the person who lived there. This is my house, I said. He looked at the folder. He looked at the address on the folder. He looked at the number on my door. He looked at me. Ma'am, he said carefully. According to our paperwork, this property was purchased 67 days ago. We have a deed of sale and a certificate of title. The escrow closed on, he checked the date, March the 9th. I stood in my doorway, and I did not move, and I did not speak, and I looked at the key in his hand. It was not my key. My key has a red rubber cap that I put on it 22 years ago, so I could find it in the dark, in the bottom of a bag, without looking. The rubber has worn smooth over the years, gone soft at the edges from the pressure of my thumb. The key this man was holding was clean and bright, and had never been anyone's. Come inside, I said. And then I heard myself say it, and I understood that was wrong. I did not know these people, and this was not an invitation I was prepared to extend, so I said, wait there. I went back inside. I left the door open because in Miami you do not close your door when the heat is already there. It only makes it worse. I called the escrow company from my kitchen, standing at the counter where my bread was cooling on a wire rack, the smell of it still in the air. I found the name of the company on the document the man had handed me through the doorway, Suncoast, Title, and Escrow, a Coral Gables address. And I called the main number and I asked to speak with someone about the property at my address. The woman who answered was professional and kind in the way of people trained to deliver difficult information without raising their voice. She confirmed the sale. She confirmed the closing date. She confirmed the sale in there. Okay. A did not recognize. Occasion red dollars. Of read to an account, she read the last 4 digits of 4 digits I did not recognize, 4 digits that had never belonged to anything of mine. She said the seller had been represented by a power of attorney. The POA had been executed by the seller's daughter, acting as authorized agent for the seller. The seller's name on the document was Rosa Ferreira. The daughter's name on the document was Camila Santos. I said, I did not sign a power of attorney. There was a pause. She said she understood. This was distressing. She said she could email me the documents on file. I gave her my email address, and I stood at the counter and I waited. And in 2 minutes, the email arrived and I opened the attachment on my laptop, the old one with the cracked corner of the screen that I keep meaning to replace, and I read the power of attorney that bore my name. The signature on it looked like mine. I will say that plainly, because it is true. Someone had learned to write my name in a way that was close to how I write it. Close enough to pass a notary, close enough to close an escrow. But I have been signing my name the same way since I was a girl in Sao Paulo, learning to write with a fountain pen at my school desk. And I know my signature the way I know the sound of my own voice. And what was on that document was an echo of my signature, not the signature itself. The R in Rosa has a particular loop I developed at 13 and have never changed. The loop on this document was slightly too wide, slightly too careful. The loop of someone who had practiced copying rather than someone who had always simply written. The date on the power of attorney was a Saturday in February. I knew immediately where I had been that Saturday. I had been in Broward County at a client's vacation property in Pompano Beach, doing a deep clean that had taken me 6 hours. I had driven my van. My phone had been in my pocket the entire time, tracking my route with the GPS I keep on because my insurance requires it for business vehicles. I closed the laptop. I went to my bedroom and I took my work van keys from the hook by the window and I checked the GPS app on my phone, the one that logs every trip, and I found the February record and I took a screenshot of it and I sent it to my own email. And then I stood in my bedroom for a moment, very still, the way you stand when you have just understood something and are deciding whether you are ready to know the rest of it. I went back to the kitchen. I opened my laptop again. I went to the website for my credit monitoring service, the one I pay for. Because 35 years ago, I arrived in this country with nothing, and I learned early that your credit score is the only document that tells the truth about you in a language every bank understands. I checked it every month. I had never found anything I had not put there myself. There were 2 accounts I had never opened. A personal credit line for $18,000, opened in my name 9 weeks before the house sale. A second credit line for $24,000 opened 6 weeks before the house sale. Both were listed as current, which meant someone had been making minimum payments on them, just enough to keep them from flagging, just long enough to avoid attention before the house sale closed and the money moved. $42,000 added to $195,000, $237,000. I sat with that number for a moment. I am a woman who has always understood numbers. I came to this country and I did not speak English, and I did not know anyone, and the first thing I learned to do fluently in this language was to count the price of groceries, the cost of a bus ticket, the hourly rate I could charge for cleaning a bathroom, a kitchen, a whole house. I learned money in English before I learned anything else, because money was the language I needed to survive in. $237,000 was not an abstract number to me. It was 12 years of work. It was my mortgage paid twice over. It was every early morning and late night and weekend I had given to someone else's house so that I could come home to my own. The man with the moving truck was still outside. I could see the top of the truck through my kitchen window. I called Lucia. Lucia Mendez has been my closest friend for 18 years. She is from Guatemala. She runs a bakery on the next street, and she is the kind of person who does not ask too many questions before she acts. She answered on the second ring, and I told her in the mix of Portuguese and Spanish that we have always used between us, because her Spanish and my Portuguese are close enough to share a room. If you do not look too carefully, I told her that someone had sold my house. I did not say who. I could not say who yet. Not out loud. Not yet. She was silent for 3 full seconds. Then she said, in Spanish, I'm already getting my keys. You don't need to come, I said. I know, she said, and she hung up. I went to the front door. The couple with the moving truck were sitting on the back bumper of their truck now, the man on his phone, the woman looking at the house with an expression I recognized as grief. The grief of someone who has wanted something for a long time and is watching it become complicated. They were not bad people. That was clear from where I was standing. They had done nothing wrong. I told them I needed 24 hours. I told them I was going to get to the bottom of a document error. I told them I was sorry they were standing in the heat. The woman looked at me with those grieving eyes, and she said she was sorry too, which surprised me because she had nothing to be sorry for. And the fact that she said it anyway told me something about her that mattered. After they left, I stood in my kitchen, and I looked at my bread, cold now, on the rack, and I looked at my laptop with the credit report open, and I looked at my house key on the counter, where I had set it down without thinking, the brass. The red rubber cap, worn soft at the edges, 22 years of my thumb on it every day. I picked up my phone and I called my daughter. I did not accuse. I have learned in 63 years that you do not accuse until you know everything, because an accusation you cannot prove is a door you close on yourself. I asked, carefully, whether Camila had heard anything about some paperwork related to the house, whether she knew anything about an escrow company in Coral Gables, whether there was something she wanted to tell me before I started making calls. There was a pause on the line. It was not the pause of a person who is surprised. It was the pause of a person who has been waiting for a particular moment and is now deciding which version of themselves to be in it. Then my daughter said, in the gentle and patient voice of someone who has rehearsed this sentence until it sounds like love, Mama, please don't get upset. You know how you get confused when you're stressed. We talked about all of this. You signed everything. Remember? At the kitchen table? I was right there with you. I did not answer. I did not argue. I did not tell her what I had found in the GPS records, or what the escrow agent had said, or what the signature on the power of attorney looked like to someone who had been writing her own name for 54 years. I said, I see, and I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen. Outside, the truck was gone. The street was quiet. The morning heat pressed against the windows. My bread sat cold on the rack. I opened the drawer beside the stove, the drawer of Tondri Tuazed, Tondri and Tumen Tumedi Evan Tu and Tu Elf. I opened the drawer beside the stove, and I sat down at my kitchen table, and I wrote the date at the top of the first page in large, clear numbers, the way I write everything, deliberately, without hesitation, with the full force of a mind that has never once been confused about what day it is. Then I began to write down everything I remembered. By 2 in the morning, I had filled 9 pages. Not with feelings. I do not write feelings when I need to understand something. Feelings take up space without giving information. What I wrote was sequence, date, event, who was present, what was said, what I noticed but chose, at the time, to explain away. I wrote in the particular style of a woman who has kept business records for 35 years. Precise, spare, nothing wasted. Line after line after line. The pen moving fast enough that my handwriting went narrow and vertical, the way it does when my mind is moving faster than my hand. 9 pages by 2 in the morning, and the thing that lived inside those 9 pages, the shape of it, the architecture, was not what I had expected to find. I had expected to find a single betrayal. One act. One terrible decision made in a moment of desperation. What I found instead was a blueprint. 11 months ago, in late spring of the year before the sale, my neighbor Mrs. Park had knocked on my door to return a casserole dish. I had lent her in February, and she had said something I remembered now with entirely different weight than I had given it at the time. She had said, Rosa, your daughter mentioned you've been having some rough patches lately. I just want you to know, if you ever need anything, you knock on my door anytime. I had thanked her, I had assumed Camila meant the roughness of being 63 and tired and running a business alone. I had not asked what specifically Camila had said because I was not in the habit of investigating kindness. I wrote that down. 9 months ago, Camila had driven me to my annual physical, offered to drive, said she wanted to spend the morning with me, said she had been worried I was overworking. I had been glad for the company. In the examination room, while my doctor was reviewing my file, Camila had said casually, "The way you say something that is simply true." She has been forgetting some things lately. Names, mostly. And sometimes she starts a conversation and loses the thread of it. My doctor had looked at me gently and asked if I had been feeling any cognitive changes. I had said no. My doctor had made a note. I had not thought about the note afterward. I had assumed it was routine. I wrote that down too. 7 months ago, my brother Antonio had called from Orlando on a Tuesday evening, which he does not usually do. He calls on Sundays, between lunch and the afternoon, always. A Tuesday call meant something outside the ordinary pattern. He had asked how I was feeling. He had asked whether I was sleeping. He had asked, very carefully, whether I had thought about talking to someone, a therapist, a counselor, anyone, because Camila had called him and said she was concerned. He did not say what she was concerned about. Specifically, I had told him I was fine. I had told him he did not need to worry. I had been faintly irritated and had not examined why. I wrote the date of that call from memory. I was certain enough of it to write it without a qualifier. 5 months ago, on a Saturday, Camila had come by with a bottle of wine and takeout from the Cuban place on Palm Avenue. And after we had eaten and while we were washing the dishes together, she had said, "Mama, I've been thinking you should give me a copy of your house key, just so I have it. In case of emergencies." I had thought nothing of it. I had gone to my key hook and taken down the spare I kept there, not my key, the backup, and handed it to her and gone back to the dishes. She had slipped it into her purse without making anything of it. I had forgotten it happened until I was sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning filling my 9th page of a timeline that was telling me something I did not want to know. 3 months ago, a man had come to my door on a Wednesday afternoon. He had a business card and a rehearsed smile, and he said his name was Derek Walsh and that he specialized in helping seniors manage the financial complexity of real estate assets. He said he had been referred by someone in my community, he did not say who, and that many older homeowners were not aware of the options available to them for maximizing the value of their property without the burden of upkeep. I had told him I was not interested and closed the door. I had not mentioned it to anyone. I had not connected it to Camila. I wrote his name on the legal pad and I drew a box around it. Then I opened my laptop and I looked at the deed transfer document the escrow company had sent. And I found the name of the agent of record for the seller's side of the transaction, the person who had represented Rosa Ferreira in the sale of her own home, and the name printed in the field was Derek Walsh, Walsh Premier Realty, Coral Gables, Florida. I looked at the boxed name on my legal pad. I looked at the screen. I did not need to draw anything to connect them. I searched Derek Walsh's license number through the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation database. I had navigated that database before every cleaning business in the state has to, because licensing matters, and I had learned years ago which databases tell the truth about people. His license was current. But beside the license number, in the complaints field, there were 3 open records. 3 separate complaints, all filed within the past 4 years, all from female homeowners over the age of 65, all involving properties that had been transferred via powers of attorney the homeowners claimed they had never executed. 2 cases had been closed insufficient evidence both times. 1 was still active. The women were not named in the public record, but the case numbers were there, and the filing dates, and the counties: Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach. A trail moving north along the coast. one case every 14 months. The spacing of a man who was careful enough to wait for each situation to cool before beginning the next one. I did not sleep. When the sky began to go gray at the edges, I put on fresh coffee and I crossed the street. Elena Correa has lived in the house opposite mine for 15 years. She is 71 and was born in Lisbon and has the particular quality of stillness that some people develop when they have outlived everything they thought would outlive them. She opened her door in her housecoat, and she did not look surprised to see me. People who have been neighbors for 15 years understand certain kinds of early morning visits. I told her what had happened. Not everything, not the whole of the 9 pages, but enough. When I loot face. A loot face changed in a way I will not forget. She said, "Rosa, just my name," like that. Like a door opening onto a room she had hoped she would never have to show anyone. She said her friend Miriam, a Cuban woman, 69 years old, who had lived in a condo on Coral Way for 23 years, had lost her apartment the same way 8 months ago. Different agent of record on the paperwork. But the same structure. The same power of attorney. Miriam was now living in her son's spare bedroom in Kendall, spending her savings on rent she had never planned to pay, fighting a civil case that her son's lawyer said might take 3 years to resolve. "She is not the only one," Elena said. "No," I said, "she is not." Lucia arrived at my house at 8 that morning with 2 coffees in paper cups and the name and address of an attorney written on the back of a bakery receipt. The attorney's name was Isabel Vega, and her office was in Doral, and Lucia said she had met her once at a community legal aid event, and that she was the kind of person who listened before she spoke, which Lucia considered the most reliable indicator of professional competence. Isabel Vega's office had a waiting area, with chairs that were comfortable, and a receptionist who did not make you feel that your time was less important than hers. Isabel herself came out to greet me, rather than having me brought in, which told me something about how she understood the dynamic of the rooms she operated in. She was perhaps 50, Honduran by background, with the composed efficiency of a woman who has spent 15 years doing work that required her to remain calm while the people across from her were falling apart. She listened for 40 minutes without writing anything down. Then she said, "The power of attorney, the signature, we can fight that. The credit lines, we can fight those too. But I want to be direct with you about something. The dementia narrative your daughter built is not careless. It is not the behavior of someone acting in panic. That kind of narrative takes months to construct and requires placing it with multiple credible sources: a physician, a family member, neighbors. She was building a legal defense before there was a crime to defend against, which means she knew from the beginning that what she was doing was wrong and that you would eventually find out, and she planned for that moment." I said, "What do I do about it?" Isabel said, "You dismantle it before you do anything else. Because if this goes to court and your credibility is the question, you need an answer that is not your word against hers. You need documentation." The neuropsychological evaluation was scheduled for the following Thursday. Dr. Priya Nair's office was in Coral Gables, clean and quiet, and she explained the process with the patience of someone who understood that agreeing to have your cognitive function measured was not a small thing to ask of a person. The evaluation took 3 hours and 11 minutes. I know the time because I checked my watch when it began and again when it ended, as I always do, because I am a woman for whom time is a resource I have never had the luxury of losing track of. She asked me to name the current date. I named it. She asked me to name the president, the governor, the mayor of Miami. I named all 3. She read me a short story about a woman who went to a market, bought 3 items, and returned home to find her door unlocked. 20 minutes later, she asked me to repeat the story. I repeated it word for word, including the detail that the woman had bought bread, not just food bread specifically because details are what I retain. She asked me to draw a clock showing the time as 10 past 11. I drew it. She asked me to connect numbered dots in sequence. while simultaneously connecting lettered dots in alternating order. I completed the pattern in 40 seconds. She asked me to remember 5 words at the beginning of the session and repeat them at the end. I repeated all 5. When it was over, Dr. Nair removed her reading glasses and looked at me across the desk and said, "Mrs. Ferreira, your scores are in the 94th percentile for your age group. There is nothing in this evaluation that supports any concern about cognitive decline. Nothing at all." I said, "Can you put that in writing?" She said she could. I said, "Please put it in writing twice. 1 copy for my attorney and 1 copy for me." That evening, I came home to a house that still legally belonged to 2 people who had done nothing wrong, and I made dinner nothing elaborate. Rice and black beans, the meal I make when I need to think without distraction. And I ate at my kitchen table with the yellow legal pad beside me, and my laptop open to the credit report, and Dr. Nair's preliminary written summary beside both of them. I had built a small architecture of truth on that table, and it was growing. After I washed the dishes, I remembered the tablet. Camila had left it 2 Christmases ago, the year she had come for 3 days, and we had cooked together and watched films, and it had seemed, for those 3 days, like the simplest version of what a mother and daughter could be. She had left the tablet in the hallway cabinet when she packed to go, and I had meant to mail it back and had not. And then I had forgotten it entirely, because I do not use tablets myself. And the cabinet holds things I have no immediate need for. I found it under a winter scarf and a flashlight and 2 expired coupon books. The screen was dark and the battery was dead. I plugged it into the charger in the hallway, and I waited. And after 7 minutes, the apple on the screen appeared. And after another 2, the home screen loaded, still carrying Camila's profile, still logged into her accounts, because she had never thought to remote wipe it, because she had, I suppose, forgotten it too. I opened the browser. I opened the history. The platform was called Sportsbet International, and the transaction records went back 31 months. I scrolled slowly, the way you read a document that is telling you something worse with every line. Deposits in amounts that seemed manageable at first, 200, 500, 1,000, and then larger, and then the withdrawals that did not cover the deposits, and then the pattern of a person trying to win back what they had already lost, which is the most expensive pattern a person can fall into. I did not add the numbers as I scrolled. I was not ready to add them yet. I only looked. Then I closed the browser. I set the tablet on the kitchen table beside the legal pad, beside the credit report, beside Dr. Nair's written summary, beside the GPS records from the February Saturday when the power of attorney claimed I was sitting at my kitchen table signing my house away. I photographed every surface of the table. I sent the photographs to Isabel Vega's email with a subject line that said only, "Found this tonight. Tablet belongs to my daughter. She left it here 2 years ago." I sent it at 11:48. Then I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time, not moving, holding the thought of my daughter at 22, standing at the kitchen counter in this same house. The first year she was old enough to help me do the books for the cleaning business, adding columns of numbers in a school notebook with careful precision. Her handwriting so much like mine that sometimes I had to look twice to tell whose notes were whose. I held that thought for as long as I could, then I let it go. Outside, the night held its own kind of stillness. The Miami stillness that is never truly quiet, always carrying the low far hum of the expressway, the click of the neighbor's sprinkler system, the occasional car. I had lived inside that sound for 22 years. It had been the sound of my house at night, the specific signature of this place, this street, this life I had built from $30 and a suitcase and 2 hands that knew how to work. I picked up my pen. I opened the legal pad to page 10. I wrote the date at the top of the page, large and clear, the way I had written every date on every page before it. And I kept writing. The federal building on North Miami Avenue has a lobby the color of old concrete and a security checkpoint staffed by officers who have seen every kind of person carry every kind of thing through those doors. The officer who scanned my bag did not look at me any differently than he looked at the man ahead of me or the woman behind me. That was the first thing I noticed, and it mattered more than I expected it to. In a room where I had half feared being treated as someone whose credibility was already in question, I was simply a person with a bag that contained nothing dangerous and a folder that contained everything true. Special Agent Tran met me in a room on the fourth floor with a table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out over the expressway. She was younger than I had imagined from our phone call, mid-30s, Vietnamese American, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the focused economy of movement that belongs to people who have trained themselves out of wasted gestures. She shook my hand and she offered water, and she sat down across from me and she said, "Tell me what happened." I opened the folder. I had organized it in 11 days. Tab 1. The Power of Attorney document. With the signature comparison, I had typed out and annotated the specific characteristics of my genuine signature versus the characteristics of the forged one, referenced against a sample of my actual handwriting taken from a business contract I had signed the previous October. Tab 2. The GPS records from the February Saturday, printed with the timestamps and the route map, showing 3 hours of continuous movement between my Hialeah address and a vacation property in Pompano Beach. Tab 3. Dr. Nair's written cognitive evaluation. 2 copies, both signed. Tab 4. Screenshots of the Sportsbet International account history from Camila's tablet, organized by month, with a total at the bottom that I had finally let myself calculate. $84,260 in net losses over 31 months. Tab 5. Printouts of the 3 regulatory complaints against Derek Walsh, with the case numbers and filing counties highlighted. Tab 6. A handwritten statement from Elena Correa, dated and signed, describing what her friend Miriam had experienced and the structural similarities to my own situation. Agent Tran went through each tab without rushing. She asked specific questions, the kind that told me she was not learning the subject for the first time, that she had seen versions of this architecture before. When she reached tab 5, she paused longer than she had paused on the others. She closed the folder. She looked at me. "How long did it take you to put this together?" 11 days, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mrs. Ferreira, the pattern you have documented across Walsh's prior complaints, combined with the evidence in your own case, gives us a basis to pursue this at the federal level. Wire fraud across county lines, elder financial exploitation, those are federal charges. I want to be straightforward with you. This will take time, months, possibly longer. But what you have brought in today is not nothing. This is a start that most people in your situation do not have, because most people in your situation have not done 11 days of work like this." I thanked her. I did not tell her that 11 days of work was nothing, that I had been doing the work of building things from insufficient materials since I was 28 years old and had never known how to do it any other way. Camila came to the house on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the FBI meeting. She did not call first. She knocked 4 times in the particular rhythm she had been using since childhood. 2 quick, a pause, 2 more. And when I opened the door, she was standing on my porch with her arms loose at her sides and her face arranged in an expression I had never seen on it before. Not the gentleness of the phone call, not the calculated patience of the dementia story, something stripped of performance. She looked, more than anything, exhausted. I let her in. I did not offer her anything. I sat at one end of the kitchen table and she sat at the other, and I waited. She said, "I know about the FBI meeting." I said, "Okay." She looked at the folder on the table. She looked at the tablet, still sitting beside it. She looked at me. And then she said something I did not expect. "I'm not going to do the other thing anymore." I knew what she meant. The other thing. The gentle voice. The rehearsed patience. The careful grammar of a woman who has been telling 11 people for 8 months that her mother cannot be trusted with her own memory. She was dropping it. Right there at my kitchen table, she set it down, and for the first time in longer than I had realized, I was simply looking at my daughter. What came next was not a confession. It was closer to an excavation, Camila digging back through the months and pulling up the pieces in the order they had actually happened, rather than the order she had previously assigned them. The gambling had started 4 years ago, she said. Slowly at first. The way these things start slowly? A few $100s? Then a few more? Then the chasing of losses? That is its own kind of logic, a logic that feels like problem solving right up until the moment you understand it. By 18 months ago, she owed $84,000 to the platforms, and another $31,000 to 2 private lenders who had stopped being polite about repayment schedules. Derek Walsh had found her. She wanted me to understand that she had not found him, that he had come to her, that he had known about her debt through channels she did not fully understand, and had presented himself as a solution in the way that people who prey on desperate people always do, calmly, with paperwork, making the thing sound less like theft and more like a transaction. He had told her what to do and in what order. He had told her that elderly women whose mental competence was in documented question were rarely believed when they disputed real estate transactions, and that the key was to build that question before the dispute arose. He had given her the language to use with neighbors and doctors and family members. He had been, she said, very specific about the language. She did not cry while she said this. I am noting that because it mattered. She was not performing remorse. She was reporting. The way you report, when you have finally decided that the truth is the only remaining option and you are going to deliver it straight, rather than decorated. When she finished, I did not speak immediately. I looked at the table between us, the folder, the tablet, the legal pad, with its 10 pages of precise, small handwriting. Then I said, "You told 11 people I was losing my mind." She said, "I know. My brother, my doctor, Mrs. Park across the street. You sat in my doctor's office, and you told him, in front of me, that I was forgetting things, that I was losing the thread of conversations. You said that to a doctor. You said it while I was sitting in the chair next to you." She did not answer. "The house?" I said. "I understand what the house was. I understand the debt and the fear and the man who found you when you were desperate. I do not forgive it, but I understand its shape. What I cannot find the shape of what I have been sitting with for weeks and cannot find is that I pointed at nothing specific. I pointed at the space between us where the 8 months lived. You tried to take my mind before you took my house. You needed people to believe I was already gone, that I was already the kind of woman whose word could not be trusted. You built that before you needed it. That is not a person acting in desperation. That is a person who planned." She said, "Yes." That single syllable, offered without defense, was the most honest thing my daughter had said to me in longer than either of us was comfortable calculating. Derek Walsh was arrested on a Thursday morning at his Coral Gables office. Agent Tran called me at 11:47 to confirm Walsh Premier Realty. The arrest was quiet, which is how federal arrests tend to be. Not the television version, not the dramatic arrival. A few agents, paperwork, the specific, unremarkable efficiency of the law, doing what it is designed to do when someone finally gives it the tools it needs. The charges were wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy. The 3 prior complaints were reopened. 2 other victims, women I had never met, one in Palm Beach County, one in Broward, were identified through the case materials. 4 of us, total. I was not the first. I was, as it turned out, the one who documented it well enough to make the rest of the case possible. Camila cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for consideration at sentencing. She gave recorded testimony about Walsh's methods, his instructions, the specific scripts he had provided. She was not offered immunity. Her own charges, forgery, fraud, exploitation of an elderly person, A charge that applied to her own mother moved forward on a separate track. Isabel called me after the arrest to tell me the case against Walsh was strong enough that the prosecutor felt confident proceeding without my testimony. I said, "I will testify anyway." Isabel said, "You don't have to." I said, "I know." There was one more thing I had to sit with, and I had been sitting with it since the beginning. The couple who had purchased my house, the young teachers, Haitian American, the man who had stood on my porch holding a key that was not mine. With an expression of polite confusion, they were innocent. They had paid $195,000 of their own money, saved over years, for what they believed was a legal transaction. They had done nothing wrong. The law could unwind the sale and return the house to me. But unwinding the sale meant unwinding their lives, displacing them from the first home they had ever owned, sending them back to an apartment or a lease with nothing but a civil judgment against a man who might have no assets left by the time the judgment was enforced. I told Isabel, "I don't want their house back. I want what it was worth. Those are two different things, and I need you to find the path that leads to the second one without destroying the first." She said she would find it. She did, eventually, but that took longer. And the path went through Derek Walsh's brokerage accounts and seized commissions and a civil judgment that took 14 months to fully execute. I am telling you this now, so you understand I did not make that decision lightly, or quickly, or without understanding what it cost me. I made it because I was 63 years old, and I had built a life on the principle that other people's innocence was not mine to spend, even when I was the one who had been wronged. 23 days after the arrest, a letter arrived from Fort Lauderdale. The envelope was plain white. The return address was a residential treatment facility I had not heard of. Inside was 9 pages of notebook paper covered in handwriting. I recognized Camila's Portuguese, the language I had taught her at home alongside English. Because I believed a person should be able to speak in more than one register, should have more than one place inside themselves to return to. I did not read it standing at the mailbox. I brought it inside. I made coffee. I sat at the table, my kitchen table, in the house that was still, technically, under legal dispute, but was still mine, in every way that mattered. And I opened the 9 pages flat on the surface, and I read every word. She wrote about the treatment center. She wrote about the other people there. She wrote about the particular texture of waking up in a place where no one knows your history, which she described as both terrible and, unexpectedly, clean. She wrote about what she remembered of her childhood, the sound of my cleaning van pulling into the driveway, the smell of the products I used, the particular quality of the Sunday mornings when I made bread. She wrote about the debt, and the shame of the debt, and the way shame can become its own kind of logic if you are not careful. She wrote about Derek Walsh. And then, near the end of page 8, in smaller handwriting than the rest, as though she had needed to make herself smaller to say it, "The worst thing I did was not the house, Mama. The worst thing I did was make people believe you were small. You have never been small. I knew that, and I did it anyway. I don't know what to do with knowing that yet, but I wanted you to know that I know it." I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I folded the 9 pages back into their original creases, returned them to the envelope, and placed the envelope inside the folder behind tab 6, where it lay flat against Elena's handwritten statement. I did not throw it away, but I did not respond. The words were there. The truth in them was there. What I did not yet know was what to do with a truth that arrives too late to change anything and too honestly to dismiss. I closed the folder. I set it on the counter by the door, where I keep things I need to take with me when I leave. Then I went to wash the coffee cup, and I stood at the sink, and through the window above it, I could see the mango tree in my neighbor's yard, 3 doors down, the one that drops fruit on the sidewalk every August that nobody bothers to collect, and I looked at it for a long time, the way you look at something ordinary when you are trying to decide what kind of person you are still capable of being. The closing attorney slid the deed across the table and handed me a pen, and I signed my name the way I have always signed it, the R with its particular loop, the way my teacher in Sao Paulo taught me when I was 13, and said that a signature should be something no one else could copy. something that comes from so deep in the body that forgery is not imitation but impersonation, and impersonation always shows. I signed it and I dated it, and I initialed the margin, and I handed the pen back, and the attorney said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Ferreira, the property is yours." And I said thank you, and I meant it in a way I do not have full words for, even now. The house on Palmetto Street is pale yellow, 4 blocks from the house I lost, close enough that I can walk to the same bakery and the same pharmacy and the same Sunday market where I have bought my vegetables for 22 years. It is smaller than the Hialeah house by 1 bedroom and a covered carport. The previous owner had lived there for 31 years. A Nicaraguan woman who moved to Orlando to be near her grandchildren and left behind, in the backyard, a mango tree she had planted from a seedling the same year I arrived in this country. The tree is taller than the roofline now. It was in the early stages of bloom when I walked through the property for the first time. Small, pale flowers at the ends of the branches, the particular quiet industriousness of a living thing doing what it was designed to do. I closed on a Tuesday. I chose Tuesday deliberately. All the things that have mattered in my life I have done on Tuesdays: signed my first business contract, made my final mortgage payment on the old house, filed my police report. Tuesday is my day for permanent things. Derek Walsh was convicted 7 months after his arrest on all federal charges: wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, conspiracy, the civil recovery action against his assets, which Isabel had been pursuing in parallel to the criminal case, produced a settlement that covered the full value of what had been taken from each of the 4 victims. The innocent couple, the teachers, the first-time buyers who had done nothing except trust a document that had been constructed to be trusted, kept their home. The money came from Derek Walsh's accounts. His commissions, the proceeds of a property he owned in Aventura that was seized as part of the judgment. They did not lose their house. I want that understood clearly, because it was not a small thing to arrange, and it cost Isabel and her team considerably more effort than the straightforward route would have. Camila's sentencing was on a Wednesday morning in February. I did not attend. I was in Kendall with one of my cleaning crews, finishing a post-renovation job that had been on the schedule for 3 weeks, and that I had no intention of moving, because the law and its calendar were not the center of my life. Even when my name was in the paperwork, 36 months of probation, 400 hours of community service, mandatory addiction counseling for the duration of the probation period, a restitution payment schedule that her attorney told Isabel would take her years to complete, no prison time, in consideration of her cooperation against Walsh, and her voluntary entry into treatment. Isabel called me that afternoon to give me the summary. I was sitting in my van in a parking lot eating a sandwich, which is where I eat lunch when I am working, and there is nowhere else to go. I listened to everything. I said, "Thank you." I hung up, and I finished the sandwich, and I drove to the next job. Lucia came the following Saturday with a box of brigadeiros, the Brazilian chocolate truffles her mother made, and that Lucia has been making herself since her mother passed. The recipe unchanged, the same ratio of condensed milk and cocoa that produces something that tastes less like candy and more like a specific kind of memory. We sat on the back porch of the yellow house, the 2 of us, in the 2 plastic chairs I had brought from the old house, because they are good chairs, and I saw no reason to replace what still functions. The mango tree was behind us, its branches extending over half the yard, the fruit beginning to set, small and green and weeks away from being ready. Lucia talked about her granddaughter, born in the middle of everything, who had arrived 7 weeks early and spent her first month in the NICU and was now, by all accounts, entirely unconcerned with having started life at a disadvantage. She talked about a new supplier for the bakery, who was less reliable than the old one, and about the city's plans to repave the street in front of her shop, which would mean 3 weeks of difficult parking and reduced foot traffic that she was already dreading. We talked about the mango tree and whether it would produce well this year. And I told her what the previous owner had told me, that the tree was generous in odd-numbered years and modest in even ones, and that this was an odd-numbered year, so we should expect abundance. After a while, Lucia said, "Are you going to answer her letter?" I had been waiting for the question. Lucia asks the things that need asking, which is one of the reasons I have kept her close for 18 years. "Not yet," I said. "But you kept it." "I kept it." She nodded. She understood what that meant, that keeping is not the same as forgiving, and forgiving is not the same as forgetting, and none of those things happen on a schedule that belongs to anyone other than the person doing them. She did not push further. She ate another brigadeiro and looked at the mango tree, and we sat together in the late afternoon while the light moved across the yard at the angle that light moves in Miami in early spring, warm and horizontal, everything it touches going briefly gold before the evening takes it. I went back to work the following Monday. My crew 6 women, 5 of them immigrants, 2 from Guatemala, 1 from Haiti, 1 from Colombia, 1 from the Philippines, and Daniela from Recife, who has been with me for 14 years, had kept Ferreira Cleaning Services running through the 14 months of the legal process with a competence and loyalty I had not had enough occasions to tell them I noticed. They had covered my jobs, managed my schedule, handled client communication, and done it without drama and without asking for anything beyond the wages and respect they had always received. When I walked into the supply room that Monday morning, there was a cake on the folding table, store-bought from the supermarket on Okeechobee, with white frosting and a piped message in blue that said, "Welcome back, Rosa, not Mrs. Ferreira, just Rosa, because that is who I am, to the people who have worked beside me for years." The cake was very sweet and slightly dry, and I ate 2 pieces and told Daniela it was the best cake I had ever had, which was not literally true, and which she knew was not literally true, and which made her laugh in the particular way she laughs when something is true in the way that matters more than literal. It was Isabel who told me about the coalition. The Miami Immigrant Elder Protection Alliance, a coalition of elder law attorneys, community organizers, and social workers focused specifically on the population I came from. People who had arrived here with little, built something over decades, and become targets precisely because what they built was visible, and what they knew about the legal system was limited. They were looking for people willing to speak. Not experts, not attorneys. People with the specific authority that comes from having lived through something and come out the other side with their wits intact. I said yes before she finished the sentence. The first meeting was in a community room at a library in Hialeah. 32 people, mostly women, mostly over 55, mostly from somewhere else originally. I spoke in Portuguese for part of it, Spanish for another part, and the particular halting English I have always used in rooms where formality is required, not polished, but precise, because precision matters more than elegance when you are trying to make someone understand something they need to know. I told them what had happened to me. I did not soften the parts that were shameful, not the part where my daughter was the one who did it. Not the part where I had handed over my social security card because I was asked nicely, not the part where 8 months of careful lying had almost made me seem like the unreliable one. I told them, they counted on you not being believed. They built their whole plan around the idea that an older immigrant woman with accented English and limited knowledge of American legal systems would be too embarrassed, too confused, or too afraid to fight back effectively. Everything they did because they expected you to absorb it. Show them exactly how wrong that calculation was. Afterward, a woman named Rosario 71 from Ecuador, who had been sitting in the 3rd row with her hands folded and her face very still, came up to me and said, in Spanish, "My son keeps telling me I probably signed something I don't remember. He keeps saying I need to see a doctor about my memory. But I know what I signed and I know what I did not sign." I gave her Isabel's card. I said, "Trust what you know." To whoever is reading this, I am 63 years old, and I came to this country 35 years ago with 1 suitcase and enough money to last a month if I was careful. And I was careful, and I built something real. My daughter helped someone take it. And then she tried to make 11 people believe I was too far gone to notice. I noticed. I documented. I showed up to a federal building with a folder I had built in 11 days, and I sat across from an agent, half my age, and I told the truth in the language I learned specifically so that people in rooms like that would hear me clearly. I am not telling you this to make you afraid. I am telling you this because fear is what they counted on, and it did not work, and that matters. If you are watching this, and something in my story sounds like yours, if there is someone in your life rewriting your history, questioning your memory, building a case against your reliability, before you have done anything to deserve it, I want you to write it down, date it, name the witnesses, keep the receipts, and then find someone like Isabel Vega and hand her the folder. Leave a comment below. Tell me what country you are watching from. Tell me your story if you want to. I will read it. Subscribe if you want to walk alongside whatever comes next, because I have more to say and I am just beginning. On the Saturday after the library meeting, I bought a new keychain at the hardware store on Palm Avenue, not because the old one had broken, but because the old one was complete. 22 years on one keychain, the original key with the red cap retired to a dish on my dresser, where I can see it from the door. The new chain has a single key on it. I chose a blue rubber cap for it, the color of a door. I remember from a street in Sao Paulo. The door to the house my mother kept for 40 years, the door I have not walked through in more than 3 decades, because it belongs to someone else now, and all the things that were behind it belong to memory rather than geography. I walked up to the front door of the yellow house on Palmetto Street, and I put the new key in the lock, and it turned easily, the way a key turns when the lock is new and the fit is exact and nothing has worn yet. I went inside. The mango tree in the backyard was in full bloom, small, pale flowers covering every branch, the particular abundance of an odd-numbered year. The light came through the kitchen window at the angle it would come through every morning from now on, the angle I would learn the way I had learned the angle in the old house. The way you learn any light that falls across a surface that is yours. I turned on the oven. I did not need to look up the temperature. I measured the tapioca flour by feel, the way my mother measured it, the way I have measured it every Sunday for 35 years, because some knowledge lives in the hands and does not require instruction. The eggs, the cheese, the small amount of oil, the combining of things that in separate states are ordinary and, in combination, become something that fills a kitchen with the specific smell of a Sunday that is beginning rather than ending. Same recipe, different kitchen, same hands. The house on Palmetto Street, which is my house, which belongs to me and to no one else, slowly filled with warmth.